Hi, this is Jeremy again. I did my paper on France's Marion partisan tactics, the myth and legends that aided the Americans to victory in the American Revolutionary War. Francis Marion, or better known as the Swamp Fox, Marion was born in 1732 near Georgetown, South Carolina. His family was from the French Huguenots, the early Protestants, and at the peak of his militia time in 1780 and 80, Marion was 48 years old. He only stood about 5 foot 2 inches, 110 pounds, and he was born with a defect in his knees that caused him to kind of be bow-legged, I guess is the best way to explain it. The Continental officers that he served with said he was shaped like a 13-year-old boy, and others called him and his men often that they were burlesque and even wretched just because of their appearance. Marion was a former commander of or former officer of the Continental Army, but because of his distaste of some of his peers, he decided to lead the militia in South Carolina. If you're unfamiliar with Francis Marion, you might know the fictitious story of Benjamin Martin in the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson. This fictional story it has parallels, I guess, of Marion's efforts. So some of the aspects of the movie kind of spoke to his actual existence, if you will. But again, it was fictitious, so there was a lot of Hollywood involved in it. My paper itself focused on 5 primary areas. The first area was who Marion was, the Swamp Fox himself, his French and Indian War experiences, intelligence gathering. The fourth one was guerrilla warfare and the militia fighting that he did. And last, of course, was his myth and legends and the contributions to the war itself. The subcategories of each of those, for example, Marion's, who he was, his personal history, and how he became the Swamp Fox was kind of where I focused. The second, I focused on the French and Indian War and the tactics that he learned, the harsh conditions, the brutality that he faced in that war, and what kind of made him the fighter that he was. And then intelligence, Marion's role being a spy, basically, during the Southern Campaign, and his contributions that ultimately led to the larger efforts and the impacts of the battles overall. Fourth was his guerrilla and militia styles, reasons for fighting in this manner, his distaste for fellow officers, and then the tactics that he employed while he was fighting as the militia. And of course, the myth and the legend itself. Some of the bigger aspects of that really focus on the supply line impacts, the general fears that his army created, and the morale that he caused or decreased in the British forces. The results really from my paper in the study, Marion and his army impacted the overall war by disrupting British supply lines, as I mentioned. That was probably one of the greatest impacts that he contributed to the actual overall efforts by weakening the forces and weakening the supply lines, and which also led to morale issues, which also led to other impacts to the British soldiers. He provided General Greene with intelligence that aided in his effort to further disrupt the British plans and their efforts overall. So this intelligence that he was supplying was given to the bigger army, if you will, and ultimately impacting some of the larger battles rather than some of the battles that he actually fought, which were pretty minimal for the most part. Another thing that he did really was countering evil, is how I mentioned it, in the form of General Tarleton. So if you're familiar with General Tarleton, Bannister Tarleton, he was really probably one of the worst that should have been tried for war crimes. If you recall the movie and how that individual acted, very, very similar to the truth in the sense of how bad he was going against the South Carolina citizens. So really, Marion kind of countered some of that evil with attacks on Tarleton's men, the supply lines, etc. And then the last thing really was the understanding the impact of the war and the post-war environment. So Marion realized and understood that even dealing with the Tories, these were people that were going to be here after the war, and what his views were on that and how he felt best to disrupt the efforts, but at the same time also preserve the people that were going to ultimately be there after the war. And a few final thoughts that I had first was overall General Marion and his militia army aided larger efforts, as I mentioned, that won the American Revolutionary War. His efforts directly didn't necessarily contribute directly to some major battle, per se, but his efforts aided every other aspect of the war. Um, his notoriety was grander and often embellished, far more than he actually accomplished. The stories about him were more important to the men and their accomplishments than really what he contributed. And lastly, I believe that he was dynamic in the collective effort. Without him and his men, the South War campaign would have ended differently. I think he was a great contributor to the success of that Southern campaign by aiding General Greene, as I mentioned, and then even just some of the fearful aspects of what the militia were bringing to the table. Thank you.